Introducing Position Group Monday. Starting this week, every Monday until training camp, we will preview a Washington Commanders position group. And this week, we're starting off with the Washington Commanders quarterback situation, ranking and projecting both Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into this Monday episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And you can continue the conversation over on Subtext at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders, where you can go one-on-one with me because I'm your host, David Harrison, Washington Commanders beat reporter for Commander Country, Sports Illustrated's FanNation site covering the Commanders, also on Twitter at dharrison82. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, I appreciate all of you everydayers for your continued support of the show. On today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're going to discuss the quarterbacks on the Washington Commanders roster, where they're coming from, and how they might help you win your fantasy football league. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. So to get started with the quarterback conversation, first we're going to talk about where these quarterbacks came from. And this is where we get the opportunity to talk about all the quarterbacks on the roster. As we get through this conversation, though, you're going to see kind of the depth quarterbacks will kind of fall off on the roster fall off the conversation just because there's not a whole lot of fantasy outlook for a third string or a practice squad quarterback, right? As far as dynasty leagues are concerned, I would love to give you some dynasty advice and some dynasty opinions, but I'm going to be quite honest with you. My dynasty team in our Locked On Dynasty League, not doing very well. So maybe I'm not the guy to talk to about dynasty football, but I do make the playoffs in my money league, my league of record, as they like to say, every single season. So I'm pretty good at this fantasy thing. Don't always win, but I'm always very, very competitive, which I think is what we want, right? So we're going to begin our look back at 2022 with, of course, Sam Howell. In 2022, entered the league as a fifth-round pick made by the Washington Commanders after he was projected to go much, much higher for most of the lead up to the weekend and the season before, the year before, a lock to be a first-round pick. Some people talk about the number one overall pick, all these things. And then we've kind of talked about this before every day, as you'll remember, plenty of conversations about Sam losing all of his weapons before his final season in Chapel Hill with the North Carolina Tar Heels there, and then ultimately having a quote-unquote down season, which was still actually a fairly good, fairly productive statistical season, leading to the apparent dip in his draft stock. In fact, Bleacher Report, in their final multi-round mock draft before the 2022 NFL draft, they had Sam Howell going to the Seattle Seahawks with pick number 40 in the second round. Pick 40 in the second round, which is still, a big drop from being maybe the top quarterback taken or a number one overall pick or at least a first round pick, going from that to 40th. Still a pretty good drop. Instead, though, he actually went 104 picks after that, even going 144 again to the Washington Commanders. Now, Howell's scouting grade from NFL.com's Lance Zierlein was a 6.22. He gave him a 6.22 overall grade, and that categorized him as will be an average starter in the NFL. We're going to get a chance probably to find out this year. However, with that grade, he had the third highest production score among all quarterbacks in last year's NFL draft, the seventh highest athleticism score, and the third highest total score, yet he was the sixth quarterback drafted. So he has that production, multiple years of production, leadership. Obviously, the loyalty is through the roof to stay in North Carolina when he could have come out and made millions and millions of dollars. And he's the third highest graded or scored quarterback according to the metrics, yet he was the sixth quarterback drafted. So obviously a dip in the opinions of pros and scouts and all that stuff across the NFL, right? In comparison, when you look at this year's class, Tennessee quarterback Hendon Hooker received a 6.23 grade, so 0.01 higher than Sam Howell's in his 6.22, and he was selected, Hooker was, with the fifth pick in the third round. That's 76 picks higher than Sam Howell. So that 0.01 apparently accounted for 76 picks when you compare the 2 years drafts and where these quarterbacks went. And Hooker is coming off of a torn ACL on top of it when you look at that and his development. So Obviously, a very big discrepancy there. I think it was just an example of the massive underselling that the league experienced around last year's quarterback class and how it impacted Sam Howell directly. And it's kind of an interesting contrast because I'll get on here and talk every draft season whenever the team that I'm covering starts talking about, oh, get a quarterback, get a quarterback, get a quarterback. And I always kind of get frustrated by the overdrafting of quarterbacks and how this league tends to kind of take a stance of go get a guy instead of get the guy and all these things. And you go back kind of years and years and, the Philadelphia Eagles jumping up to go get Carson Wentz, the Rams jumping up to go get Jared Goff. And, look, the evaluations are the evaluations, but back when those trades happened specifically, and they're not the only ones, I don't mean to necessarily isolate them, but just an example of this happening when those teams traded up and gave up as much as they didn't, for my opinion, for my look, didn't seem like the types of quarterbacks, the types of players that you would want to go up there and get. But both teams basically were like, we need a quarterback. And, I don't know. I think we've seen that not work very well, more so than we've seen it work very well. Now, the Eagles, they've got 2 Super Bowls, so I don't think they're regretting any decisions they've made along the way. But, I digress. You can't necessarily say, well, go get a quarterback, and whether it's him or not, you'll win a Super Bowl anyway. Back to Sam Howell. Of course, it worked out well for Washington, right? The underselling of quarterbacks last year worked out well for Washington because they got what we believe that they had a day 2 grade and evaluation on in quarterback, and Sam Howell. They got that day 2 guy in the second round of day 3, right? The 5th round overall, second round of day 3. And now Sam Howell is their quarterback 1 as we get ready to enter training camp. Now, granted, he likely would have been a starter earlier had he been drafted closer to his actual evaluation, but he did get the 1 start against the Dallas Cowboys in week 18 of last year after the Commanders had already been eliminated from playoff contention. If you remember, the idea was that Taylor Heinicke was going to start the game, but then Sam Howell would eventually come in and get some reps. And then Taylor Heinicke went to the coaching staff, said, hey, Sam deserves a start. He's done everything he needs to prove that he's ready. Let's give him the start. And there you go. Sam Howell got the start. Now, in that game, Howell completed 57% of his passes for 169 yards through 1 touchdown and 1 interception, along with 5 carries for 35 yards and a touchdown. That rushing touchdown produced the famous flex that Eric Bieniemy said he appreciated so much when he saw it from Sam Howell. Now that, along with his practice and his meeting performance, convinced head coach Ron Rivera that Howell had what it takes to potentially lead this team into 2023. And it didn't take very long into the offseason for the team to make it publicly known that he would enter the offseason workout program as the top quarterback. And that basically eliminates the Washington Commanders from taking a day 1 quarterback, really a day 2 quarterback for the most part, but also takes them out of the running for veteran quarterbacks like Derek Carr, who was on the trade block and eventually released by the Las Vegas Raiders. Eventually, though, the team did land on a veteran addition to the quarterback room after they lost Taylor Heinicke to the Atlanta Falcons. They turned right around side Jacoby Brissett, who spent 2022 with the Cleveland Browns. While the Browns traded for Deshaun Watson to be their quarterback of the future, they also found themselves in need of a veteran option to fill the gap because Watson was suspended until week 12. In the 11 weeks that before Watson returned, Brissett started all 11 of those games, going 4-7 as a starter, completing nearly 64% of his passes for 2,608 yards, 12 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions. He also ran the ball 49 times for 243 yards and 2 touchdowns. Now, while Brissett is new to the team, third-string quarterback Jake Fromm was with Washington last year. Fromm didn't get any playing time last year, but he seems pretty well cemented as the team's 3rd quarterback this offseason. Going to be their option this year for that. And with the new emergency quarterback rules, could be dressing more than he ever has before in case they need an emergency quarterback. Another newcomer along with Brissett is undrafted free agent quarterback Tim Demorat, who spent 5 years at Fordham and in his final season won the Patriot League Offensive Player of the Year award for the 3rd straight season. He had a season-high 503 passing yards against Ohio last year, and that included an 84-yard pass in that game, which was his longest of the season. Demorat also threw 56 touchdowns and ran for 5 more while throwing just 10 interceptions. So very efficient, very intelligent with the ball. He'll likely end up on the practice squad, but training camp and preseason opportunities could give him a chance to show what he's got as far as potential for the NFL. So that's how 2022 went for our quarterbacks. Now let's look at what the experts think and where these quarterbacks stack up entering 2023. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon today to join. The Washington Nationals are currently last place in the NL East, and it's not likely that Washington is going to see postseason play this season. But if you think they could pull it off and even win the World Series this year, then you could make $100,000 on a $100 bet right now on FanDuel for the Nats to win the World Series. However, if you want to maximize this no sweat first bet offer, then place $1,000 on either the Braves or the Dodgers. And if they win, whichever team you choose, you could earn $4,300 in profit. But if they lose, you get that $1,000 back in free bets for your troubles. And if you want to stick to the Commanders wagers, then you can go in and bet on Washington to win the Super Bowl at plus 6,000 odds, or you could go the safer route and bet on the over-under win total for the Commanders, currently set at 6.5 games and minus 122 odds to hit the over. So don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Thanks again for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view of the day. Turning now to our quarterback outlook rankings, looking at divisional rankings, conference rankings, and league-wide rankings. We're going to start with a wide lens, and then we'll bring it in closer. So we're going to start off looking at the league rankings and how some of the national aspects, not national outlets, are looking at these quarterbacks, this quarterback room here in Washington. Now, these national outlets, for the most part, are using Sam Howell as the starting quarterback when ranking the position for the offseason. Every day, as you know, we expect Howell to be the starter, right? Jahan Dotson's gone on the record talking about Sam Howell as the starter. Coach Rivera is raving about him. Eric Bieniemy is raving about him. It would be quite the 180 if the team suddenly turned to Jacoby Brissett. But training camp is still, to come. Preseason games are still coming, so never say never type of thing. It's not set till it's set. But head coach Ron Rivera continues to deliver the message that this is still a quarterback competition, even though Sam Howell is getting all of the first-team reps. That being said, here are some league-wide rankings that I found from national outlets, some of the more popular national outlets. We're going to look at Pro Football Focus, NBC Sports, and then USA Today. Pro Football Focus, in their ranking of the starting quarterbacks in the NFL, again, they used Sam Howell. They ranked Howell number 27 out of the 32 projected starting quarterbacks, saying another almost total gamble. Howell was given one game late last season to audition for the starting job and performed well in it. He completed 11 of 19 passes for 168 yards and a touchdown while rushing for 35 yards and another score. Howell was seen as a legitimate prospect before sliding all the way to the 5th round of the 2022 draft, but expecting anything above this would be wildly optimistic. End quote. I don't know if expecting above the 27th ranked quarterback in the NFL is necessarily wildly optimistic. I would certainly call it optimistic. There's only the one game, like they mentioned, like we've mentioned, to really go off of Sam Howell. So you don't want to sit here and kind of blow the trumpet or bang the drum too loudly right at this point in time. But I think that, hoping for a top 22, top 20 type of performance out of Sam Howell is optimistic, but not necessarily wildly optimistic. Still, PFF has Sam Howell 27th overall among other NFL quarterbacks. NBC Sports ranks Sam Howell as their 39th overall quarterback, and this is coming from Chris Sims, who ranks as top 40 quarterbacks in the NFL, so he's got backups on that list. And according to Chris Sims, guys, there's 6 or 7 backups that are better than Sam Howell, so we'll see how that prediction unfolds and winds up by the end of the season. USA Today kind of combined Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett, basically just said the Washington Commanders quarterback room, and they ended up putting them number 28 in the NFL. So a little bit more online with what PFF says, one spot lower, certainly not nearly as bad as Chris Sims has Sam Howell. And, there's not a whole lot of description on Chris Sims's list. Maybe he said it on his show. I don't know. I don't watch his show, but maybe it's just because of the lack of experience. I don't know. Maybe he's not willing to really project all that much, which would be fair. If that's the case, we'll get into that here in just a little bit. Now, USA Today was one of those outlets that actually put together a tier of quarterback rankings, and they put Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett in tier 6, which is young enough to earn the benefit of the doubt. Jacoby Brissett not exactly a spring chicken at this point in time. So that's obviously referring to Sam Howell. The average ranking there, because of those rankings, is the 31st overall quarterback in the National Football League this year, of course, skewed quite a bit by Chris Sims in his 39th overall ranking for Sam Howell. Jacoby Brissett did not make Chris Sims's top 40. Now, when we look at those national rankings and we break it down to just the NFC, according to PFF, Sam Howell is the 13th best NFC quarterback. That's 13 out of 16. So they're towards the bottom. NBC Sports, he is the number 18 quarterback in the NFC. Obviously, there's only 16 teams. So again, some backups making that list, including Taylor Heineke, who is projected to be the backup behind Desmond Ridder in Atlanta. Heineke coming in as the 16th overall quarterback in the NFC. USA Today, Sam Howell / Jacoby Brissett, again, number 13 overall in the NFC for a total average of the 14th overall quarterback in the NFC out of 16 possible options this year. Now, NFC East rankings, this is where I'm going to come in, right? I'm going to leave the national and conference rankings to the national guys because they, look at every team on a consistent basis, on a daily basis. That's what they're paid to do. I am paid to pay attention to Washington. Because I pay attention to Washington, obviously, I'm paying a closer attention to Philadelphia, Dallas, and the New York Giants than I am any other teams outside the division. So I'm going to go ahead and rank my top NFC East quarterbacks. Again, if you've got a differing opinion, by all means, leave it in the comments. Let me know what your ranking is. And if you agree, let me know why you agree. Number one, I've got Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. He's, just took his team to the Super Bowl. I think he showed that dynamic passing ability, rushing ability, and I think that he takes another step forward this year. Number two, I've got Dak Prescott out of the Dallas Cowboys, solid quarterback. I don't think he's the kind of guy you can put your franchise on his back and let him just kind of carry you to the mountaintop. I think the Dallas Cowboys have seen that, are starting to kind of understand that. And every day, as you know, we've kind of talked about the lack of weapons for the Dallas Cowboys, the lack of effort to replace the weapons they lost for the Dallas Cowboys. I'm not completely sold on the Brandon Cooks arrival. And I don't necessarily, I'm not on the same train as some people are that's going to just completely unlock this offense and turn Dak Prescott into an MVP. I could be wrong. It's just not what I see right now. What I could also be wrong is about where Sam Howell ranks, because I've got him third in this division as a leader of the Washington Commanders. And then, of course, that means I've got Daniel Jones fourth, leading the New York Giants. Look, watching him play twice, this looks much more like a Giants team that wins in spite of their quarterback instead of winning with their quarterback. When you have to put it on Daniel Jones, that is not good news, usually for the New York Giants. Now, every quarterback can get hot for a game or two, granted, but I just don't think consistently Daniel Jones is going to be that guy or has been that guy. And I think they made a big mistake paying Daniel Jones instead of Saquon Barkley. I think you pay Saquon Barkley, you franchise tag Daniel Jones. That's the route I would have gone. They went a different route. They may not have their all-pro caliber running back because of it. Is it a little presumptuous to put Sam Howell up above Daniel Jones right now after just one game? Yeah, I'll admit to that, but that's where I see these quarterbacks stacking up. Honestly, it would be the same ranking even if Jacoby Brissett wins the job. He would still be my third quarterback in the NFC East. Of course, the real game is important, right? Obviously, but so too is fantasy football. Fantasy football is something that a lot of football fans are involved with. You are probably involved with fantasy football. So we're going to take a look at the buzz on Sam Howell, Jacoby Brissett, their fantasy outlooks. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Fantasy outlook times here for quarterback Sam Howell, quarterback Jacoby Brissett, Washington Commanders quarterbacks. And again, Jake Fromm, third string quarterback as of right now. Tim Demorat, undrafted free agent rookie. You saw them fall off of the conversation in the last segment because they're just not being ranked right now on the national scale or in the division. And then, of course, they really don't have a lot of fantasy value at this point. So they're going to fall off that conversation as well. But certainly want to make sure everybody remembers they are on the roster. They are practicing. They are preparing. And certainly some ability within those two young gentlemen. So looking at the fantasy outlooks for Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett as best we can, we looked at, again, three more fantasy sources: Pro Football Focus, Fantasy Pros, and Yahoo Fantasy are the three that we turn to here for this conversation. And Pro Football Focus has Sam Howell as their number 27 overall fantasy quarterback. I believe that's where they ranked him among all starting quarterbacks. So it certainly makes sense in that aspect. But we all know that your statistics on the football field don't necessarily marry your fantasy value, right? Sometimes players can have maybe lesser stats according to the NFL and as they stack up against their peers, But depending on how stacked those stats are and how touchdown reliable those stats are, sometimes the fantasy value of a guy can be higher than his actual finishing in the NFL among his peers. Now, this Sam Howell ranking number 27 is in tier 6, and PFF ranked their fantasy players by tiers. In tier 6 for Pro Football Focus is quote unquote an injured Kyler Murray and low floor quarterback. So they've got Sam Howell. Kyler Murray is in this tier because he's injured. Nobody's expecting him to play. So if you're a year to year, a season to season draft league, you're probably looking to avoid Kyler Murray, right? And then you've got low floor quarterback. So basically saying Sam Howell has the potential to really kind of bottom out in this first year as a starter, which I think is a fair assessment. You don't really know what you're going to get. I would probably put him in more in tier 5, high-end question mark quarterbacks. He's got a lot of weapons around him, a lot of opportunity for screenplays that could break big, things like that. That's still, touch passes that are basically end around runs. If that's a touchdown pass for a guy like Sam Howell. And he's got a very creative offensive coordinator in Eric Bieniemy. So I think I would probably put him in tier 5, but that's pretty close to tier 6 anyway. So not a lot of anger here from these tiers. But for those curious, tier 1 was high-end passers with high-end rushing ability. So think Patrick Mahomes, those kinds of guys. Tier 2 is a choose your fighter type of quarterback, high-end rusher or high-end passer. That's where a guy like Joe Burrow, who's not going to give you a lot of rushing yards, but he's a very top-end passer. Sit tier 3, pushing for a high rate of weekly 12 finishes. Tier 4, established fantasy quarterbacks that we can mostly rely on. Tier 5, again, high-end quarterback, question mark quarterbacks. Tier 6, and injured Kyler Murray and low-floor quarterbacks. Tier 7 was, so you're saying there's a chance, right? And I think guys like Kyle Trask of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers live there, along with Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett, tier 7, the number 42 overall quarterback. So probably not going to look to draft him, but he's kind of the guy that maybe if you've got a roster spot, maybe you stash him in case there's a replacement or an injury. Sam Howell, number 27. If you're in a 12-team league with 2 quarterbacks, then obviously that's 24 quarterbacks that are going to get drafted. Maybe you take a flyer on Sam and reach a little bit, 3 or 4 spots to get him there in the final round of your draft, hoping on that upside. Maybe that could pan out for you, maybe not. But if you're in a 1 quarterback league, even as a backup, I don't know. I would probably stash Sam Howell as my backup quarterback if I was, willing to. Again, like most NFL teams, if your fantasy team starting quarterback goes out, a lot of the times that's pretty much it. Your goose is pretty much cooked, right? Fantasy pros, turning to them now. Sam Howell is tier 5. Now, they don't label their tiers with any fancy headlines or anything, but they do break them down into tiers. They have Sam Howell as their 5th tier, as a 5th tier quarterback, which sounds higher than PFF, but they actually have him as the number 29th overall fantasy quarterback, which is 2 spots lower than PFF. They have him listed after Trey Lance of the San Francisco 49ers, which I think is a little interesting because I don't think Trey Lance is going to get a lot of playing time this year. And when he didn't look very well. But they've also got him before Ryan Tannehill of the Tennessee Titans, which makes a lot of sense. And then Jacoby Brissett is also in tier 5. So you see kind of how big that tier is. But he's the 35th ranked quarterback, so 6 spots below where Sam Howell is sitting. They've got him after Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans. I don't know about that. From a volume standpoint, sure, Will Levis has the opportunity, obviously, to get more volume, and volume can be king in fantasy, so maybe that's where they're coming from. Again, no descriptions here from the Fantasy Pro guys with their rankings, but that was a little suspect to me. But again, if you're just looking at the likelihood that Mike Vrabel and his staff in Tennessee are done with Ryan Tannehill and will pull the plug to put Will Levis in by, say, week 4, and then he'll run the rest of the season, okay, volume is obviously going to be more likely there than Jacoby Brissett. But they do have Jacoby Brissett coming off the fantasy boards ahead of Sam Darnold with the San Francisco 49ers. So keep an eye on him. If you're looking at waiver options, or if you do get a quarterback injured or on a bye, something like that, you may want to keep that in mind. Yahoo Fantasy has Sam Howell as the number 27 overall quarterback come in. Now their ranking system is interesting. They've got a bunch of analysts, and they basically all rank the quarterbacks, and then they average those. So Sam Howell's ranking really came through as an average of number 27, but his highest ranking was number 21 overall, which is the highest that we've seen him from a national analyst, and that was Dalton Del Don, who put him there. The lowest ranking, however, was number 36, so we're now back towards like the Chris Sims area of this thing, and that came from Matt Harmon. Again, going after Ryan Tannehill in this case, so that's interesting. I would definitely put him before Ryan Tannehill, but before Bryce Young, the rookie quarterback for the Carolina Panthers. Jacoby Brissett is the number 35th overall ranked quarterback, according to Yahoo Fantasy. His highest ranking, number 27 overall, by Matt Harmon. So Matt Harmon obviously prefers veterans. And then the lowest was number 38 by Andy Barron. Again, after Sam Darnold is where Yahoo projects him, before Gardner Minshew, now with the Indianapolis Colts. So those are those experts. Where am I drafting Sam Howell? I'm drafting Sam Howell after Tua Tagovailoa. And, again, I'm not going to break down my entire list. So there might be a guy that you have below Tua Tagovailoa in your personal opinion, but you would have over Sam Howell. I get that. But I'm going after Tua Tagovailoa. I'm going to go before Daniel Jones. Again, I might be putting the cart before the horse, but I'm not buying the Daniel Jones hype. So where am I drafting Brissett? I'm drafting him after Derek Carr. If he's the starting quarterback, I'm drafting him after Derek Carr, but I'm drafting him before Mac Jones. So that's our quarterback breakdown. Again, every Monday between now and training camp, we will break down a new position group, talk about where they came from, what the national media is saying about what they're going to do, and then we'll add in a fantasy flair as well. Coming up tomorrow, we've got another mailbag episode coming. So again, if you want to get your questions in for that or future mailbag drops, put them in the YouTube comments, email them to lockedoncommanders@gmail.com. Hit me on Twitter at dharrison82 or via subtext at joinsubtext.com/lockedoncommanders. As always, I want to thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for coming through on a consistent basis like you do. And remember, you can continue the conversation with me over at joinsubtext.com/lockedoncommanders. Thank you so much for making me a part of your day, part of your routine. And if you have anything else Washington Commanders related that you want to know or discuss, make sure you also follow me on Twitter at dharrison82. Until we speak again, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.